Paul, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me and for that very warm welcome. I was actually in Glastonbury 2 weeks ago. The festival's long gone, and I was there to open some housing that has been built from the proceeds of the festival, and the place looked really strange with just a sort of sculpture of the pyramid stage and only sheep around it. You see how life moves on. So thanks for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to be here for the second year running. A good deal has changed since I came to your conference last year. We had a surprise general election to many people here, and perhaps an even more surprising result. A result that returned a weak and divided Conservative government and a Labour opposition stronger and more united than ever before. We've also seen the terms of the economic debate shift dramatically. I put it to you last year that for too many people, the economic system simply is not working. A system that's delivered rising inequality and falling living standards for the majority. When 6 million of those in work are earning less than the living wage, it's a system in which large numbers of people have lost confidence. It's not hard to see why. The richest 10% now own 900 times the wealth of the poorest 10%. And in recent years, half of the increase in personal wealth has gone to the top 10%. I put it to you this year that a crucial reason for the surprising election result, the biggest turnaround in polls during an election campaign in British history, is that Labour went to the country with a vision that offered hope and change. Our manifesto, for the many, not the few, set out a fully costed programme to build an economy which gives everyone the chance of a secure and fulfilling life. Since the general election in June, the political establishment has finally begun to catch up. Calls to end austerity now come from all sides in Parliament. Senior cabinet ministers are taking their lead from Labour and pushing for more radical solutions to the housing and student debt crises. Sajid Javid advocates 50 billion of borrowing for investment in housing. Jeremy Hunt has broken ranks and called for an end to the public sector pay cap. Few would have predicted that a year ago. And of course, we've yet to see if they've convinced the Chancellor. It's a measure of the essential pragmatism of business people that so many have changed their outlook too. Business people across the country have expressed to me growing awareness and acceptance that things have to change. The London Chamber of Commerce recently called for councils to be allowed to borrow freely to build housing. We all know an economic model that allows a few to grow very rich while the majority face falling incomes and rising indebtedness that leaves too many people in unfulfilling and insecure work, that's overly reliant on one sector in one region of our country, is neither stable nor sustainable. And in this Living Wage Week of all weeks, we have to be clear that Britain needs a pay rise. When too much of household income is going to pay debts or rent, then that's less money for consumers to spend on productive businesses. That's why Labour backs a real living wage and sensible control on rents and debts. Because it isn't good for business either. We understand Labour has changed and you have changed. But there is one thing that hasn't changed. A year ago, we were just 5 months on from the referendum vote to leave the European Union. The government's sluggish response to which had already created unprecedented uncertainty for business. A year on, Article 50 has been triggered. Brexit negotiations are underway, but many of you feel no closer to having the clarity about the direction of travel they desperately need. Indeed, watching chaos and confusion grow at the heart of government and Brexit negotiations stuck in stalemate, many of you probably feel the situation is more uncertain and precarious than ever. Time is running out. We know, as you do, that firms are deciding now whether to continue to invest in the UK, and that guarantees in key areas are needed now to stop firms from cutting the UK out of their business models. A few weeks ago, you joined forces with Britain's other major business organisation, the Engineering Employers Federation, the Chamber of Commerce, the Institute of Directors, and the Federation of Small Business. And remember, so many people in the private sector actually work for small and medium-sized businesses, and they must be taken into account in all of our considerations. You joined forces to ask the government to heed the needs of business as they negotiate our exit from the European Union. We agree. We need a Brexit that puts jobs and living standards first, and it's Labour that has common ground with you on putting the needs of the economy front and centre stage. We have common ground on the need for transitional arrangements to be agreed immediately, so that businesses know they won't face a cliff-edge Brexit when the two-year negotiating period is up. Because, let me be clear, to delay a transitional deal until a final deal is agreed, as the Prime Minister says she wants to do, is simply not good enough. The prospect of sudden changes in the legal and regulatory environment in which people do business is affecting your decisions right now. And we have common ground on the threat of no deal, which, contrary to the claims of the Secretary of State for International Trade, is potentially a nightmare scenario, one that involves tariffs on our food imports and our manufacturing exports, queues at our ports, and a hard border in Northern Ireland, with all the dangers that could bring. The fact that some in the Cabinet want no deal to relaunch Britain as a race-to-the-bottom deregulated tax haven on the shores of Europe only adds to the risks. And we agree on the need to signal that the UK remains open to the rest of the world, that Europe is not the enemy, but a partner in a strong cooperative relationship for the future. And that European Union citizens living in Britain are our friends and fellow workers, and neighbours and friends of our families, which is why the government should immediately and unilaterally guarantee them full rights to remain here. In fact, they should have done that months ago. And indeed, Labour called for that in July of last year, just after the referendum. Like you, we've always said that we respect the result of the referendum. Like you, we've always said that the economy, jobs and living standards should come first in the negotiations, which means it is crucial that the final deal maintains the benefits of the common market and the customs union. I promise you today, between now and March 2019, we will use every opportunity we can find to put pressure on the government to do the same. But, as Carolyn has so rightly pointed out, we mustn't use up all our energies on the Brexit negotiations. There is vital action to be taken at home too. What will be determined in the next 2 years is not just our relationship with the European Union, but the kind of economy and country we want to live in. A bad Brexit deal risks exacerbating existing weaknesses in our economy, low investment, low productivity, low pay. We'll be letting the country down if we don't seize on the period of change to tackle those weaknesses at their root causes by working together to give shape to a new economic model that will create a fairer and richer Britain for all. I believe we share a great deal of common ground on how this should be done. And again, I echo Carolyn. If we are to raise wages and living standards, we must solve our productivity crisis. And it is a crisis. It continues to take a worker in Britain 5 days to produce what a worker in France or Germany produces in 4. If the OBR decides that our recent dismal productivity performance is not an aberration, but the new norm, and revises down their projections when they report to Parliament later this month, it will take a huge toll on our public finances, as the Institute of Fiscal Studies has pointed out. It couldn't be clearer. Our productivity crisis is making our country poorer. The answer to our productivity crisis lies in investment, in infrastructure, in new technologies, and in people. Business investment is being held back by creaking infrastructure and a shortage of skilled workers, so government must act first. Yet, under the Conservatives, crucial infrastructure investment has been delayed, from rail electrification to the Swansea tidal lagoon. The adult skills budget has been slashed. They even went into the election promising to cut per pupil funding in real terms. The Chancellor should use his autumn budget to change direction and invest in long-term growth. That's what Labour has already pledged to do. With a National Transformation Fund to upgrade our country's infrastructure and reverse years of underinvestment in the regions. Unfairness between the South and the North, and between East and West and the nations has to be addressed. We have to be investing in transport, energy, and capital infrastructure right across the country. So, we will establish a national investment bank with a network of regional development banks that will provide patient finance for firms wanting to adopt and implement existing innovations or to develop entirely new ones. We are a very creative country. And we'll build a national education service to ensure that when businesses create skilled jobs, there are people able to fill them. And where businesses adopt new technologies, there are employees who know how to use them. These policies will help create the conditions businesses need to invest. But they will only deliver the improvements our economy needs if they're backed up by a bold industrial strategy. Again, this government failed to act. We've heard a lot of warm words on industrial strategy, but we're still waiting to hear how they will take it forward. Labour's industrial strategy, built on national missions for energy transition and to increase research and development spending to 3% of GDP by 2030, will lay down the challenge to business to provide the foundations on which they can be met. We will invest £1.3 billion on research and development in our first 2 years in government to galvanise private investment. Set up 2 new catapult centres for retail and metals, centres of collaboration and innovation to drive productivity improvement. And harness the £200 billion spent by the public sector each year to boost local economies and local supply chains, to bring prosperity to every region of the country. That's how we deliver properly funded public services in the long run and ensure everyone earns enough to live on. If we get this right, it's not just our economy that will be stronger, but our political institutions and our social bonds as well. We will, as you know, raise some taxes to pay for it. I knew you were going to be welcoming that bit. To ensure that our spending plans fit within the constraints of our fiscal credibility rule. And when we do, we'll be clear and open about our tax plans, as we were during the general election. We won't do it by stealth. and we will seek to improve the functioning of businesses' taxation wherever possible by uprating business rates in line with CPI instead of RPI, moving to annual revaluations and exempting new plant and machinery, and by looking at staggering tax incentives for investment and innovation. We'll do this because a fair and functional taxation system is the only way to deliver the investment in infrastructure and skills that are so desperately needed across the country. And I'm sure everyone here will agree, providing good infrastructure and education is what responsible governments do. And it's not just government that has a duty to be responsible. Business does too. From ensuring their suppliers, often small businesses, are paid promptly, to ensuring they pay their taxes in full too. And the shocking revelations from the Paradise Papers today, yet again, of widespread tax avoidance and evasion on an industrial scale must lead to decisive action and real change. It is by no means all big businesses, but these actions by a few undermine the trust in all businesses. And they are the victims too, not just reputationally, but financially. Those businesses that play by the rules and pay the taxes they owe are being undercut by those who don't. The vital revenues government needs to fund an industrial strategy, good infrastructure, and world-class education that we aspire to. These things can only be delivered by fair taxation. So while we mustn't tarnish all businesses by the actions of the few, we also have a duty to come down hard on those who are avoiding their responsibilities and give Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs the resources it needs. As our Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, has set out this morning, we need a full public inquiry into tax avoidance and evasion on and offshore, a register of companies and trusts and who benefits from them, and a new tax enforcement unit in HMRC, and an end to public contracts for companies who are abusing the system. And we will look at using withholding tax where individuals or companies are involved in abusing the system, and end public contracts for companies engaged in abusive tax avoidance. Please understand this: the public anger and consternation at the scale of tax avoidance revealed yet again today. We're talking about tens of billions that are effectively being leached off our public services by a super-rich elite that holds the taxation system and the rest of us in contempt. We must take action now to put an end to this socially damaging and extortionately costly scandal. And there's another area where we have all a duty to act, and act now. Faced with the ongoing revelations about sexual harassment, we should make this a turning point and a moment of real change. We must no longer allow anyone to be abused in the workplace. Such abuse, sexism, and misogyny is sadly very far from being confined to Hollywood and the corridors of power. It's also widespread in our schools and universities, in our businesses and workplaces, in our newspapers and on our TV screens. It's all around us. That must change, and business has an essential role to play. All of you, all of us need to look hard at ourselves, as we in the Labour Party are doing, to see how our processes and procedures can be improved, how it can be made easier for women to speak out and for victims to get the support they have a right to expect. Businesses can have a vital partner in rooting out injustice in the workplace, the trade unions. They're crucial to taking on and rooting out sexual harassment and discrimination. And I would encourage each and every business to be serious about improving workplace culture and tackling sexual discrimination at work, and to engage with the trade unions to do that. Governments also have other responsibilities, enforcing a fair and transparent regulatory framework so that, for example, businesses aren't destroyed by the likes of RBS abusing their power, providing for the health of our citizens, and yes, in some cases, running essential public utilities. Because every one of you in this room who knows what goes on, seeing an idea brought to the market, or what it takes to survive the cut and thrust of consumer choice month to month, knows that privatized monopoly utilities are not real markets. Where's the pressure for efficiency and innovation if consumers cannot go elsewhere when they're dissatisfied? I know some of you will disagree and think that bringing some parts of the economy into public ownership won't be good for the reputation of business. But it's not good for the image of business when water companies pay out billions in dividend and interest payments through opaque financial arrangements, while households see their bills go up to pay for it. It's not good for business people if their employees have to spend huge amounts of time and money getting to and from work each day on expensive and unreliable services. It's not good for manufacturers to have among the most expensive energy in Europe, or see energy transition held back because the necessary investments to transform our energy grid are not being made. And just as it wouldn't be good for business to be locked into inefficient funding arrangements that don't provide finance on the best terms available, or inflexible contracts that don't adapt to your needs, nor is it good for the public. That's why we will end the private finance initiative, because PFI contracts have overcharged the public to the tune of billions. You wouldn't put up with it, and neither will we. But we won't let ending PFI hold up vital infrastructure investment. We'll end it to make sure that investment happens in a way that gives best value for money for the public in a way that better meets user needs. This isn't about being anti-business or anti-enterprise or about closing ourselves off to the rest of the world. It's about deciding to attract business from across the world by creating world-class infrastructure that is efficiently funded, cheap and reliable energy, safe and efficient water and transport systems, and a skilled and educated population. Not by allowing a select few to make monopoly profits from our essential utilities. This isn't a throwback to a bygone era. It's entirely in step with what is happening in much of the rest of the world. Some of the world's biggest economies, Germany and France, and even the United States, are deciding that key sectors such as energy and water are better off in public ownership. It's time for Britain to catch up. Building an economy for the many will mean making some big changes. But it would also mean an economy that is stronger, fairer, and more stable. And business people know more than anyone how important that is. We have common ground on Brexit, common ground on investment, training, and industrial strategy, and a government that embraces its responsibilities and carries them out for the common good. That's what Labour offers you, and that's what Labour offers Britain. And I thank you for inviting me again to the CBI conference, and I value the day-to-day relationship we have with the CBI, as does John McDonnell and others in my team, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future, whenever the general election comes, and we, I hope, are in government to continue working with you. Thank you very much.
Jeremy has kindly agreed to take a few questions. If you'd put your hand up and be kind enough to introduce yourself and your firm When we see the paddles go up, you'll have our undivided attention. Number 4.
Frank Miller from the Centre for Process Innovation on Teesside. In a renationalised Britain, what are the biggest innovation challenges?
I think the innovation challenges that are going to be huge for you and all of us are high technology, robot technology, and all the technology that goes with it. Previous industrial revolutions have always led to huge disparities of wealth and power, and a lot of opposition to them. Think of all the great technological changes over the past 200 years. We're now into a 4th industrial revolution. That has to be something that ensures the creativity and the wealth that grows from it has to be shared and spread fairly. And you look at the massive profits made by a small number of people that own some of that technology, seems to me imbalanced and unfair. We have a working group within the Labour Party on this. We are working with universities and colleges, and I know in Teesside you're doing some very good work at the college there, STEM centre there, and we would look forward to working with you on that. I don't see high technology, robot technology, all that as particularly a threat to anyone. I see it as an opportunity for all of us if there is a public participation and public involvement in it.
Jeremy, thank you for that. I will have Francis O'Grady along to talk about that as well this afternoon.
Yeah, sure. Indeed, it came up at the TUC quite a lot.
Have we got one here? Second row from the front I've got. Right, number 5 orange, go. 5 orange, perfect.
What's the colour coding? Is it something very clever?
I was briefed, but I've forgotten.
So we sort of work it out as the questions come, shall we?
Chris Hope from The Telegraph. Mr Corbyn, should the Queen apologise for her private estate making offshore investments as revealed in the Paradise Papers?
Well, anyone that is putting money into tax havens in order to avoid taxation in Britain, and obviously investigations have to take place, should do 2 things, not just apologise for it, but also recognise what it does to our society. Because if a very wealthy person wants to avoid taxation in Britain and therefore put money into a tax haven somewhere, who loses? Schools, hospitals, housing, all those public services lose, and the rest of the population have to pay to cover up the deficit created by that. And so I think the Paradise Papers, which I've been reading through on them, like all of us this morning, are quite shocking, and I did raise some of these issues at Prime Minister's Question Time last week, and we will obviously be raising the issue in Parliament, and John McDonnell spoke about it this morning, and there needs to be an immediate public inquiry. We simply have to challenge the culture that there's something clever about avoiding taxation. Taxation is what gives us ambulances, gives us fire tenders, gives us safety in our lives, and we all have a responsibility to pay for it. And you know what? It undermines every one of us here, who pays our taxes properly and diligently. We're undermined by this kind of evasion. It must stop.
Thank you, Jeremy. We've got about three more questions. I've got blue 4. By the way, orange is media.
No, I got that because it was the Telegraph who asked after an orange thing went up.
4
Yes.
here.
So we're working this out, aren't we?
Hello there.
Hi.
My name's Louise Brooks-Smith. I am head of UK planning at Arcadis. International and global understanding is great, but we really do need to make sure that our communities are looked after here. And we all know that we need to address the housing supply and delivery. There's a white paper out for consultation at the moment that is looking at some elements of that. But would a Labour government be bold and call for a comprehensive review of the Greenbelt rather than leaving it up to individual local authorities and have a piecemeal affair as we are looking to have at the moment?
And if it's a brief answer, I will have time for 2 more questions, Jeremy. Thank you.
A brief answer on housing in the Greenbelt. Come on. Listen, on housing, I represent an inner London constituency, as pretty well everybody knows. And all my life that I've represented it, I've been dealing with the housing crisis and the reality of insufficient supply of rented property by the council or by housing associations, a overcharging in a very expensive private rented sector, and the damage that overcrowded places do to children, and the damage that's done to children who have to move from one hostel to another when the family becomes homeless, means they underachieve in school. We all lose out as a result of it. And the way in which in too much of urban Britain, the working class communities are being built out and moved out of central city areas, changing our cities forever. And the words by the London Chamber of Commerce and others about the labour market problems in London are actually replicated all over the country. So there's a point and a sense in investing in good quality, socially rented housing for all to give people some certainty in their lives. If anyone's ever had the experience of talking to a family who are homeless and then that same family when they've been given secure housing, it's transformational. It's quite humbling to find it. Where we build the housing is obviously crucial because there are roughly 100,000 or so houses built per year, mostly across the UK, disproportionately probably more in London and the South East than elsewhere, and about 200,000 households created per year, some of those single-person households, some families. So there's obviously a growing problem there. We have to build a lot more. I want that building to be done with good quality, with high energy efficiency standards, and predominantly on brownfield sites. And where there is a new development, a substantial new development, then it should be accompanied, as good planning would be, with schools, with health facilities, parks, and all the other facilities, so you build a community. The Greenbelt, I feel very strongly about the principle of the Greenbelt, because if you take away this sort of cordon of green space and cleaner air around big cities, then I think you have the danger of sort of massive ribbon development. So I am somebody that is very skeptical about building on the Greenbelt. I see that in some cases there are land swaps that go on where a piece of open space is developed or created somewhere else in return for it. And that obviously is a trade-off that can be looked at. But I just think as a society, we all need a bit of open space around us. We all value our parks. You don't go to them every day, but it's good for you to know they're there and good for everybody else if they want to go and use them. And so I'm concerned about encroaching on the Greenbelt. I'm in favour of good quality planning, sometimes very high density, but well planned it can be very good on brownfield sites and urban areas. And the last thing I'll say before Paul shuts me up, he can't take the microphone off me because it's fixed to my tie. Well, I suppose he could. I suppose he could, but I'm sure he wouldn't, is the question of planning policy itself. I think planning at its best is something that we all participate in. And as a former chair of a borough council planning committee, I know that everybody has an opinion on everything to do with planning. But if we take local authorities and the community out of the equation by either a presumption to approve or permitted development rules that allow conversion of industrial and office premises into housing with no local authority input, then I don't think that's a good thing at all. Democracy ought to prevail in how we plan our lives. Deal with the housing crisis, protect our open space, plan sensibly and intelligently for the future, but think of the stress of people living in insecure, poor quality housing and how we, all of us, can do something about it. And I absolutely intend to do a great deal about it. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much. We're out of time.